going to start real easy. Why should Michiganders choose you to be their top law enforcement officer?
Well, because been practicing law in the state for 27 years. Practiced constitutional law in federal court and state court. I've been involved in a lot of constitutional cases across the state, and that's really primarily what the Attorney General has to do. Enforce the law, enforce the Constitution, protect people's civil liberties, protect the police in this state, support the police, and make sure violent crimes are prosecuted.
When you say constitutional lawyer, what does that mean? Because you have focused on real estate and tax for the most part, correct?
No, that's not true. I mean, I've done a lot of tax work in the past, but primarily I got involved in my early career filing claims against the IRS in federal court, federal claims, and then that moved on to representing clients who thought that their rights had been violated by the government. So I've been involved in cases involving the Attorney General's office for years.
You haven't served in elected office before. What do you think will be the thing you need to catch up on or learn the fastest when it comes to the role of Attorney General if you're elected?
Well, I think primarily is the administration aspect of it. But I've been involved in law firms in the past. I understand how law firms are run, and this is just a bigger law firm.
All right. Tell me what your first priority will be if you are elected, day one.
My first priority is going to be to end the Line 5 litigation started by Dana Nessel so that everyone in the state can have cheap, affordable energy across the state. Over 55% of the people in the Upper Peninsula rely on Line 5 to get their energy. Over 75% of the people in Lower Michigan rely on Line 5 to get their energy. And Gretchen Whitmer and Dana Nessel are trying to shut down Line 5 and the construction of the new tunnel in order to artificially increase people's energy costs across the state. We're not going to stand for that anymore.
Do you have a top three? What's number 2 and 3 priorities after Line 5?
Well, number 2 is we're going to ensure that our police across the state are fully funded and that they're supported by the Attorney General's office. They're going to have the full support of the Attorney General's office, and we're going to make sure they have all the counseling services they need. Right now, Dana Nessel has more police under investigation than any time in our state's history, and that has to change. People across the state right now, they want safer cities. They want the crime rate brought down. We have 750% increase in carjackings since Dana Nessel took office, 30% increase in murders since she took office. That has to end. And our third priority is to fix our school system. Make sure that parents have rights that are ensured to them under state law. State law says that parents have a fundamental right to be involved in their children's education. Dana Nessel doesn't support that. She tries to push pornography on kids in libraries. She says she wants to put a drag queen in every school. She wants to over-sexualize our children. Parents have had enough. It's time to stand up for parents and the children in this state.
Do you believe that she literally wants to put a drag queen in every classroom?
Yes, she literally said she wants to put a drag queen in every classroom, and the media shouldn't let her get away with that. The media too often, and maybe all the time, says, oh, Dana Nessel was joking about that. She wasn't joking. Dana Nessel wants to push a radical ideology on people in this state and a radical ideology on parents in this state. She's not joking when she said that. She's floating a trial balloon to see if people will accept that. In this case, they didn't. So then she backed off and said she was joking, and the media let her get away with it.
I guess I'm having a hard time understanding why. I know she did literally say that. She did. Why do you think that that would actually be her intention? What would be the result of doing something like that?
Because she said it, number one, and the result would be to push a radical ideology on children in schools. This is something she promotes, the over-sexualization of children. She wants to groom our children and push this garbage on them. We have to stand up against it. Parents are fed up with it, and I'm going to stand up against it too.
You mentioned parents' rights. You want them to have an influence in schools. What happens in districts where parents are at odds? You know, they disagree with each other. Who's to decide who's the winner and the loser?
Well, the state law says that parents have a fundamental right to be involved in their child's education. That's where it begins, that's where it ends. Parents have that right. They shouldn't have to go to school boards in order to ensure they have rights. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General for this country, came out and said parents who express their opinion at school boards are domestic terrorists. Dana Nessel came out and said she supports that. She went on camera and actually said she believes that parents who stand up for their children at school boards are domestic terrorists. The media should not let her get away with that, and the media has let her get away with it. This is an ideology that has to stop in this state.
And how, if you are elected, how does the Attorney General specifically make a difference in what's happening at the local level in school boards?
Well, we enforce the state law that says parents have a fundamental right to be involved in their child's education. Dana Nessel thinks she can enforce certain laws that she likes and not enforce laws that she doesn't like. That is a radical ideology that has to change. The Attorney General's job is to enforce the law and support the Constitution. Dana Nessel refuses to do it. I will do it, and I'll support every parent's rights in this state. Parents need to know I will be their champion in the state of Michigan.
Aside from schools, what kind of tangible difference do you think you can make in Michiganders' life? Something that they would notice day to day?
Well, we're going to reduce inflation. We're going to lower gas prices. We're going to fix the economy in this state. Businesses are leaving across the state right now saying they'll no longer invest billions of dollars in the state of Michigan because, number one, they say they're not going to put up with the government anymore radicalizing and weaponizing the healthcare department against them. When Whitmer shut down this state, and let's never forget she does it, and too often the media wants to give Whitmer a pass on that. Whitmer shut down this state. She closed businesses across the state. She forced people to leave the state, and when people wanted to keep their businesses open, she had her bulldog, Dana Nessel, go out and put those people in jail. How did we get to that point, and how did we let it happen? Businesses have left our state because of that. Businesses have also left our state because they say we have a failing education system. We're no longer teaching our kids critical math, critical reading, and critical science. Instead, we're trying to teach our children about the number of genders that exist. Businesses say they've had enough, they're leaving. The Attorney General has a lot to do with that. Number one, we will never, ever allow the government to close this state down again. Never going to do it. Never going to allow this weaponization of the healthcare department. Look at us outside today here. Why are we outside? We're outside because you guys have a policy regarding COVID and vaccination, right?
Mm-hmm. Your campaign manager did say it was fine to go inside and show that proof, but it would be easier to not collect that information from your staff.
I understand that, but the point is that here we are. We have to end this nonsense. We got to get back to allowing people to do businesses and not pushing mandates on them. We'll never push mandates on people again in this state, and we'll end critical race theory in this state. The Attorney General has a lot of say in that, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to bring businesses back to Michigan. You know, we want everyone in the country to say, I want to move to Michigan. I want to live in Michigan. That's where people live free. Instead, we got people leaving the state, going to Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, saying we're not going to put up with the radical Michigan government anymore. It's too hard to do business, too many rules and regulations, and they've left. We're going to bring them back. We're going to be a big change in the state. Business is going to come back. Our economy is going to boom. And like I said, people are going to say, we want to go live free in Michigan.
So if, and hopefully this never happens, if there's another pandemic, a deadly virus that we have no vaccine for, you don't believe in any sort of mitigation measures, like a shutdown or like restrictions that, as there were at the beginning of the pandemic?
No, we're never going to shut this state down again. Think of what happened in this state. Businesses were closed, businesses left. We had people in this state thanking the government for letting them stay open at 30%. How did we get to that point where we thank the government for letting us do business and put food on our tables? Think about what happened in schools, where we shut down schools or we segregated our children. We put children behind plexiglass. How did we get to that point where we allowed that to happen? Think about hospitals, where people died alone in this state. Parents had to say goodbye to their children through FaceTime from the parking lot. And we had hospital administrators telling parents, go say goodbye through your iPhone in the parking lot. How did we allow that to happen? They were shouting at parents saying, government orders, governor's orders. And that's never going to happen again. We're not going to do that in a state where I'm Attorney General anymore.
So would you be in favor to avoid all of those side effects of letting a deadly virus spread unchecked?
Oh, well, I think we have to certainly contain deadly viruses, but what we had in this case was a vaccine, as they say, that was never actually FDA tested or approved. But the point is that Dana Nessel was sending the police across the state to lock up people, like a pizza shop owner. Remember they locked up Marlena? They locked her up for 3 days, I believe, because she tried to keep her business open. That's not going to happen in a Matt DePerno administration anymore.
Let's talk about crime. What do you believe is Michigan's most pressing issue in regards to crime?
Well, we're no longer prosecuting violent felons anymore, and Dana Nessel doesn't support the police. You go into Washtenaw County, for instance, they're operating at a 1/3 capacity in the sheriff's department because police officers know that when they make an arrest, it's going to come with a complaint. And Dana Nessel now has more police under investigation than any time in our history. We've got illegal fentanyl flowing across the borders, destroying families and killing children. We've moved up to number 10 in sex trafficking. Like I said, we now have a 10% or 30% increase in murders, 700% increase in carjacking, and it's because Dana Nessel is an absolute coward. She refuses to stand up to the drug cartels. How do you enforce? You can't enforce the law that way. She's weak. We have to enforce the law. We got to start prosecuting violent felons. We've got too many radical leftist prosecutors in this state trying to practice restorative justice, as they call it, where they say that the victims have to meet with the perpetrators before a sentence can be handed out. We're going to end that. We're going to put violent criminals in jail. We're going to decrease crimes, and that's what people want across the state, safe cities. They want their kids to be able to walk to the bus stop and be unharmed. And we don't see that right now because we got a radical leftist attorney general pushing her own social platform on us.
Do you believe there's any room for improvement or reform in policing in Michigan?
There's always room for improvement, but what we have to do is support the police and make sure they're fully funded. Dana Nessel supports the defund the police movement. You can't lower crime in that type of environment. She's directly responsible for the crime wave in the state.
Where specifically do you think there's room for improvement?
Well, there's always room to make sure that we have good cops doing good police work. There's nothing wrong with making sure that that happens. But what we have is a complete overreach and Dana Nessel actually attacking police on a daily basis. I've talked to many of them. Look, Dana Nessel just put out her endorsements from sheriffs across the state. We have 83 counties, and after 4 years, she put out an endorsement of only 5 sheriffs, and they're the sheriffs from the most radical counties in this state. I mean, come on, no one can actually say she's done a good job when she only has support of 5 sheriffs out of 83 counties. I put out our endorsements. We have more endorsements than from sheriffs than Dana Nessel does. The truth is she's done a miserable job. She attacks the police, and they don't support her.
We're coming up on 1 year since Oxford High School. What could you do as Attorney General to protect Michiganders from gun violence on the domestic level and on the scale of a mass shooting?
I think we have to fix the problems in our schools. Number one, we got to fix the radical agenda of what they're teaching our children. Number two, I think, certainly we have to harden our schools and make sure kids are protected. We got to get away from the idea of saying that schools are gun-free environments. Of course, if they're soft targets, that's the easiest place to attack. We got to make sure our kids are safe in the schools, and let's have armed security at schools.
There was security in Oxford. We've seen in other states like Uvalde, Parkland, where there were armed security, former law enforcement officers, current law enforcement officers, and that didn't protect the victims. Why would that be different, hardening the schools here?
Let's start talking about the issue of why we have kids who bring guns to school or attack schools. What's changed in the last 20 or 30 years? Let's start talking about the mental health issues that we have in this state. We no longer provide funding to help children in schools who have mental health issues. It's time we start actually allocating resources to help our children. We're not doing that under this administration. We're not doing anything to help children at all, it seems, under the Whitmer-Nessel administration.
All right. Let's talk about Flint. Your opponent has taken quite a bit of criticism for the way she's handled that case. What would you have done differently?
Well, she hasn't taken enough criticism, and the media has really let her off the hook on this. Remember, when Bill Schuette was Attorney General, he was prosecuting both Democrats and Republicans. He was an Attorney General who didn't care about party ideology. Dana Nessel came into office, dismissed all of those cases, and then attacked her political opponents and the former Governor Snyder. She did it for political reasons. She created a one-person grand jury system and issued indictments where the defendants had no ability to challenge the evidence. The Michigan Supreme Court, in a 6-0 decision, said, Dana, stop weaponizing your office against your political opponents. They said you created an illegal and unconstitutional Star Chamber comeback, and they dismissed those lawsuits. Now, the reality is the statute of limitations on those crimes has expired. Regardless of what Dana Nessel wants to tell you, she cannot refile those cases. No person in Flint who suffered, none of those families who had loved ones died, will ever see justice now because of the utter incompetence of Dana Nessel. That is a tragic story, and the media is giving her a pass over and over again. This should be one of the major headlines that runs every day in this state when they talk about her utter incompetence and talk about how she destroyed justice in Flint.
You know, I do want to give our viewers a clear idea of what they're going to get with either candidate. So I do want to hear a specific approach, a different approach that you would have taken with Flint.
We would have followed the law. We would have prosecuted both Republicans and Democrats. That's where Dana Nessel doesn't do it. She only attacks her political enemies. Continuously, she's told by courts, stop weaponizing your office. She did it in Grand Rapids when she sued the Catholic Church on the adoption issue. The court in that case told her, don't weaponize your office against people with deeply held religious beliefs. Dana Nessel doesn't support the law. She doesn't support the Constitution. She only attacks her enemies. That's the big difference. When you have an ideology that, like I do, that says, I will enforce the law regardless of political affiliation. I will support the Constitution regardless of political affiliation. That's when you see justice. Dana Nessel has failed.
You have vowed to investigate and prosecute Governor Whitmer if you are elected. Is that different from using the office to prosecute your enemies?
Oh, goodness, no. Listen, what did Governor Whitmer do? Governor Whitmer sent elderly to COVID-infected nursing homes and sent COVID-infected people into nursing homes. She did it for political reasons. She did it against doctors' advice, and people died. Over 8,000 people died. Don't you think there should be an investigation into why she did it and what politically motivated her? I think there should be an investigation.
Okay. Let's go on to the ballot proposals. We'll just kind of go from 1 to 3, starting with proposal 1. Tell me if you support or oppose it and why.
Number one? Number one, I am opposed to.
And why?
I don't believe in term limits.
Okay. Do you have thoughts about the public disclosures that would be required from public officials, including yourself, if you are elected?
I have no problem with public disclosures. We're one of a few states that don't require it, and we should. The public should absolutely know about the finances of the people that they elect.
If it is passed, how will you react to that if you are elected?
that'd be the will of the people.
So you would accept that?
We would accept it and enforce it.
Okay. Prop 2.
Prop 2, unfortunately, codifies the fraud we saw in the last election. I am totally opposed to Prop 3. We need to eliminate this mass absentee ballot program that's currently being used. I have no problem with absentee ballots for people who have legitimate reasons, but the mass mailing of unsolicited absentee ballots creates fraud. And when you combine that with the Secretary of State's directive to people to not enforce signature verification rules, that creates fraud. And we need voter ID. Prop 2 is dangerous to Michigan. It's dangerous to the integrity of our elections.
4 years ago, the people of Michigan did overwhelmingly approve absentee voting for no reason at all, more than a 2-to-1 margin. So they are clearly in favor of absentee voting for any reason. So would you uphold the will of the people if you become Attorney General?
Absolutely. I'm just saying, as to Prop 2, I am opposed to Prop 2.
Okay. You know, we've been talking about, you just mentioned the fraud that you believe took place in 2020. Do you believe today that the 2020 election was fair and accurate?
Well, all I can tell you is based on the evidence that I saw in the lawsuit I filed in Antrim County, we were able to prove without question that our election system is vulnerable and it needs to be fixed. There's no question about it. And our legislature ended up passing, I think, about 35 or more bills to tighten up our election system. And Governor Whitmer vetoed every single one of them. That tells us that the Democrats don't actually care about safe and free elections.
The evidence of fraud that you say you found, you presented that in a civil case, correct?
Yeah, we were able to put out 22 reports in the Antrim County lawsuit that proved, really beyond a doubt, how vulnerable our election system is. And people need to understand that. You know, don't lump my case in with all the other cases across the country. I was able to get a forensic image of the Antrim County voting system, and I got a court order that allowed me to look at 22 tabulators. And what we proved, I think, was significant. We proved how vulnerable our election system is, full stop. And people should look at that evidence and say, there are problems with our election system, and there is room for improvement. And there's nothing wrong with saying there's room for improvement. Look, in 2016, Democrats were screaming about election fraud. They were saying Donald Trump stole the election. Remember Hillary Clinton saying it was Russia collusion and that the election was stolen. Stacey Abrams from Georgia still hasn't conceded her election and still says that her election was stolen. And there's nothing wrong going back to 2016 and allowing Democrats to look at the results and make challenges. And there's nothing wrong with people in 2020 looking at the results and making challenges.
If you did find that evidence, though, why just bring it up in a civil case and not actually go through the measures you would need to for criminal prosecution to take place?
We did. I submitted a criminal complaint to the Antrim County prosecutor.
And why do you think nothing has come of it?
I think nothing has come of it because people are afraid of a tyrant like Dana Nessel. They know that if they take action against her, she will come after them. She has vowed already that if she wins in this election, she will go after Republicans. She's already said she will go after the Republican donor base and elected officials. She will put them under perpetual investigation, and it's her goal to ultimately destroy the Republican Party through lawfare and perpetual investigations. And whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, you should be terrified of an attorney general like that who continues to weaponize her office to attack her political opponents.
One more thing on that evidence. The Michigan Senate Oversight Committee, which was GOP-led at the time, released a report on the election and said closely followed your efforts and can confidently conclude they were demonstrably false and based on misleading information and illogical conclusions. What was your response to that?
My response is that Ed McBroom is the person who wrote that report, and I've sued Ed McBroom in the past on constitutional violations. Ed McBroom was completely biased when he wrote that, and we also know, based on evidence that we have, that Ed McBroom was communicating with the Antrim County Clerk and was also communicating with Dominion Voting System on how to actually write that report. There's nothing about his report that was unbiased. It was total garbage. So I totally discount it. And other news agencies out there have totally discredited and debunked Ed McBroom's report already.
Okay, if you've been hammering home the point that you believe the election system in Michigan is entirely permeated by fraud, it's tainted, how is anyone supposed to trust your victory if you win?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, but I'm not in charge of the election system. The Democrats are in charge of the election system. So I think people certainly could trust the election system if Republicans start winning in Democrat-controlled areas. But you make a good point. And the point is that our election system has flaws. And everyone, whether you're Democrat, Republican, or Independent, you should care about that issue. This is a nonpartisan issue in my view. Let's fix our election system. Why did Governor Whitmer veto 30-plus bills handed to her by the Republican-controlled legislature that would have closed up some of these loopholes in our election system? It makes no sense for Democrats to do that. It shows that they don't care about safe, secure elections.
So if you do lose in a couple of weeks, will you accept that loss?
Well, I'm going to win, so I'm going to accept the results.
On the off chance, in your opinion, if you do lose, are you unable to say that you will accept that outcome?
Well, I'm not going to lose. I'm going to win.
So you're very confident.
I'm very confident that we're going to win. We're going to beat the most corrupt attorney general in the country. She is a complete coward, and she's utterly incompetent.
There are certain folks out there who believe your very candidacy is a threat to democracy itself. How does that land on you? How do you feel about that?
Well, it depends on how you define democracy, I guess. I mean, listen, the Washington Post came out and said I'm number 5 on a list of people of the biggest threats of democracy. CNN came out and said my race is one of the most important races in the country. Why am I number 5 as a threat to democracy? Unless you accept the idea that they're defining democracy in different ways. The Democrats define democracy in different ways than Republicans. Democracy under the Democrat definition is mob rule, it's socialism. Democracy under a Republican definition is a constitutional republic.
But dictionaries aren't written by political parties, are they? There is such thing as fact and actual definitions,
Now,
aren't there?
Well, the definitions in this election seem to be written by the fake news media, like the Washington Post, who come out and write garbage stories about candidates, saying that candidates are actually a threat to democracy. It's just like Merrick Garland trying to silence parents when he says that parents are domestic terrorists. And this is something we have to change in our society, and it's something we have to change in politics. The media has to start looking at candidates and elections through a prism of fairness, hard news. That's what we expect from our media. We haven't seen it in this election. We've seen garbage reporting by biased media outlets who want nothing more than content clicks on their website. These are people who are content creators, not hard news reporters.
There are a lot of people who believe your intention, should you win, is to undermine, interfere with, possibly even overturn a future election. And you're smiling in response to that. I'm
smiling at just the way these things are reported. Nothing could be further from the truth. I got involved in this campaign really in March of 2020 when Whitmer shut down our state. She shut down our state and put people out of business. I started going around the state talking to businesses, telling them, don't shut down your business, don't submit to tyranny. I started helping families of little children who were failing in school or who were sent home from school and couldn't get direction from their teachers, even though they had school learning programs that the school had to satisfy. And I went to those schools to find out why kids were failing and found out they were putting our children behind plexiglass. I represented families whose loved ones were dying alone in hospitals because Governor Whitmer wouldn't let mothers and fathers say goodbye to their children. And then I started representing kids in college who were going to, as freshmen, one of the greatest years of their lives, being confined to their dorm rooms and then sent home, saying you can't socialize anymore. And watching Dana Nessel send the police across the state to lock up people who wanted to put food on their table. That's why I got involved in this election, to end what I was seeing in Michigan as the most corrupt attorney general in the country, who would weaponize her office against political opponents and do nothing against her own party. Failing to investigate Whitmer for 8,000 nursing homes deaths is tyranny right there. It is a terrible thing that she did. It needs to be investigated. That's why I ran for office. And for the media to come out and say, and to assign motive to me as if I'm trying to run for office in order to fix a future election, is total garbage.
You did rise to prominence, though, challenging the 2020 election results. Do you see it that way?
I rose, well, you could say I rose to prominence in that sense, but I've been...
To a public stage, you entered the conversation by way of questioning the 2020 election, right?
Sure, you can say that, but listen, our case was a great case. It was an amazing case. I was the only case in the country that got a forensic image of a voting system, and we were able to study that system, and the judge gave us access to 22 tabulators in order to take a look at the system and see how it works. And we identified through 22 reports real security flaws. That was the goal of our system. My client challenged down ballot school board elections. And through that case, we were able to identify significant failures in our election system. And I tell you what, we should be commended for the work we did in that case.
We'll touch on that again in a moment, but I do want to know, in 2 years, if you are elected this year, if a Democratic presidential candidate or the sitting president is elected by the people of Michigan, will you use your office to uphold that result?
Sure, I don't see why not. I mean, the whole point of my candidacy is all about the rule of law, supporting the rule of law, upholding the Constitution. And I think that's what people are missing in terms of the way the media is presenting this. There is a big difference between my campaign and Dana Nessel. Everything I've ever said is about supporting the rule of law, upholding the rule of law, regardless of political party affiliation. And I've taken heat from the Republican Party because of that. I've had district chairs for the Republican Party come out and condemn me for that position, saying, well, Matt, aren't you going to protect your political party? The answer is no. It's about the rule of law and the Constitution. And Dana Nessel is a complete opposite of that. She is a tyrant who attacks her political opponents day in and day out, and she gets a pass by the media consistently.
We're talking about rule of law. We cannot not mention the fact that you are actively under investigation. What do you expect to come from that investigation? Absolutely nothing, because we did nothing wrong. And what have I been talking about? Dana Nessel weaponizing her office against political opponents. She did it in the Catholic Church adoption case. A judge told her, stop doing it. She did it in the Flint water case. A judge told her, stop doing it. She did it in the Mexico Second Amendment lawsuit filed in Boston. A judge said, radical Democrat attorney generals, stop weaponizing your office against political opponents. And now she's done it to me. Listen, she started an investigation against me in February, knowing I would be her political opponent. She used taxpayer dollars to do it. And no one in the media wants to report on that fact. And now, 3 months before the general election, she comes out and says she's going to criminally investigate her political opponent. Whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, that should terrify you, that she would take those steps. There's nothing that I did wrong in this case. Nothing will come about it. This was entirely designed to try to hurt my candidacy and have reporters ask me this question over and over again, rather than focusing on the big issues of our state: the high crime rate, the high sex trafficking rate, the fentanyl problem, the failing education system, and why businesses are leaving. Let's not talk about inflation, the high gas prices, right? Let's talk about an investigation that Dana Nessel started against her opponent.
It is terrifying to think that we live in a society like this with Dana Nessel at the helm.
Do you think voters should be nervous about potential criminal charges that could be filed against someone who could potentially be the Attorney General of the state?
No, because there will be no criminal charges filed because we did nothing wrong. This is completely a political move by Dana Nessel. It is as obvious as the nose on your face as to what she's doing. And listen, she sits on the board of the very body that selected a special prosecutor. The entire system under which she operates is tainted. She needs to be voted out in November. We need a new Attorney General in who's going to come in and support the rule of law and the Constitution.
Let's talk about Proposal 3. I think you've made your stance on the issue pretty clear. Do you believe in any exceptions?
I do. I believe in an exception for the life of the mother. But this is another interesting question, why we always ask the question about what exceptions do you believe in? Why don't we talk about the fact about the 98% of babies that are aborted in this state simply for convenience? That's really what we're after. When we say we're pro-life, those are the issues that we care about, protecting the unborn. I'm pro-life, that's what I want to do. But yes, I allow for exceptions for the life of the mother. But let's also talk about Dana Nessel's extreme position. She supports partial birth abortion up to the day of delivery for any reason. You know, how do you accept that position? That is radical, that is extreme. The vast majority of people in the state do not support Dana Nessel's position.
If that is true, if the people of Michigan do not support Prop 3 and it fails, how do you plan to react? How do you plan to move forward if you're elected?
Well, if Prop 3 fails, then the 1931 law would still be in place, and I would enforce that law.
How so?
Well, I would enforce it as written. But that doesn't mean I like the law. I think there needs to be changes to the law, and I would encourage the legislature to amend that law. It was passed in 1931. I mean, it's archaic in many ways. It was passed before, you know, many contraceptives were in place. So I think it is a troubling law that will lead to litigation. But as it stands, I would be forced to enforce it as the top cop in the state.
Does that include prosecuting women who receive abortions and doctors who provide them?
Well, it certainly would include prosecuting doctors, because that's the way the law is written. And that's why I say I think there needs to be an amendment to the law. But it's not up to the Attorney General to pick and choose which laws to enforce.
And how about recipients of abortion care?
As it's written, I think that is a problem in the law, which is why I say it should be amended. The legislature will have to go back and take a look at that law. I don't like the law as it's written. I've been very clear about that. But the Attorney General's job is to enforce the law, not pick and choose. And that's a problem we have with Dana Nessel. She is not in the House of Representatives. She's not in the Senate. Had she wanted to be someone who passes laws, she could have ran for those positions. She ran for Attorney General. Not her job to pick and choose which laws to enforce.
If 3 does pass and that right is enshrined in the state constitution, how do you plan to react?
That would be the will of the voter. There's nothing for me to do at that point.
There would be no attempt to subvert that?
I would have no plans to do that. I think, you know, again, the Attorney General has to respect the will of the voter and enforce the law.
You mentioned contraceptives. You are on record saying you would ban the Plan B pill in the state. Why is that?
Totally taken out of context. That's not what we were talking about. What we were talking about was exactly this conversation, the idea that the law should be amended. And what I was saying was we don't want to have to get into a situation where contraceptives and their use comes into play. If life begins at conception and under this law, there could be then an issue, many legal scholars believe, as to how Plan B plays into that. I was only advocating for the idea that the law should be amended so we don't have to litigate issues like Plan B or other contraceptives.
But Plan B does prevent pregnancy rather than terminate pregnancy. You did compare it to fentanyl, didn't you, at CPAC?
Right, what I was saying was we don't want to see Plan B viewed as something like fentanyl. That was the point I was trying to make.
So you want to protect access?
We want to protect access to Plan B.
contraceptives.
Yes, so my comments were totally taken out of context, and the audio clip was spliced in a certain way where you didn't have the entire 20-minute conversation I was having prior to that. But I would absolutely want to protect Plan B. I have no interest in banning any contraceptive for anybody.
Okay. We live in a very partisan environment. It's been a rather contentious race between you and your opponent. Does that tire you out? Are you sick of throwing punches and being punched at?
You know, this is what I signed up for. I get it. What I care about is, you know, the way my family reacts to it. And when Dana Nessel comes out and makes statements that are completely untrue, it brings up things from my past that are completely taken out of context, which she knows that are utterly false, and puts them in ads, yeah, that hurts the families.
You mentioned, you know, what you believe are cheap shots or outright falsehoods coming from your opponent and how that affects your family. Do you think that the punches you've thrown have been totally above board?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I've said anything false about Dana Nessel at all. If you could point to anything, I'd like to address that.
So do you worry about how Dana Nessel's family has responded to anything that's come from yourself or your campaign?
You know, I worry about every politician and how their families react. You know, certainly I think families should be off limits. Mine has not been in this campaign. The Democrats have attacked not only me, but my family. It's reprehensible the way some of them have acted, especially Dana Nessel's chief political advisor, Jeffrey Timmer.
All right, I'm going to ask Dana Nessel this exact same question. Is there one thing that you can genuinely say, a genuine positive thing to say about your opponent, as you will be expected to work with people you don't necessarily see eye to eye with should you be elected?
You know, it seems to me, from what I've seen, that Dana Nessel is, you know, she has 2 children, she has a spouse, and they seem to be a loving family. And I appreciate that. And I think that, you know, every politician should be able to show and in some ways rely on their family, and she seems to do that, and I appreciate that about her.
All right. And then I think finally, how do you expect, or how will you earn the trust of independent and Democratic voters should you be elected?
Well, we're already earning the trust of Democratic voters and independents across the state because they care about the issues that we're talking about. When we go into communities in Detroit or communities into Dearborn and talk about the fact that we need to lower the crime rate, we need to end sex trafficking, we need to fix our schools, provide a safer place, a more business-friendly place for businesses, and to protect parental rights. When we talk about the idea of keeping drag queens out of schools, these are things that resonate with soft Republicans and independents, and we see that happening right now.
What about you referred to them as leftists. You've used that word a couple of times today. I'm not talking about moderates and people who may lean right or left. I'm talking about the blue, the people on the left.
Well, it's always my goal to bring everyone into the conservative wing in the state. And I'm not talking Republican or Democrat. I'm talking about a conservative brand of politics, which means low crime, safe schools, and business-free environment. I think that's ultimately what people want. So we're seeing changes in the state of Michigan right now. I think we're seeing Michigan move from a purple state to a red state because they've seen what destructive policies Gretchen Whitmer and Dana Nessel have brought over the last 4 years. They see the fact that there's inflation, high gas prices. You go to the grocery store, you can't find everything, or things are too expensive. People talking these days about the fact that they can't feed their pets anymore, and that people have lost at least 1 month of income out of a 12-year cycle due to inflation. That affects people. Those are real things that need to change, meat and potato issues that people really care about. And I think we're seeing a shift in this state right now away from the progressive brand of politics brought by Whitmer and Nessel into a more conservative brand of politics brought by Matt DePerno.
You've mentioned aspects of politics that you don't particularly enjoy. You've accused your opponent of politically motivated behavior that you don't approve of. Is there any way that you will take away from that polarization if you are elected? Is there any way that you can bring that temperature down and make Michigan one of the states in the country that's not so contentious?
Yeah, we want to do that by just enforcing the law. And that's a big part of it. If you enforce the law equally for everyone, equal protection under the law across the board, I think you bring harmony across the state. And that's where Dana Nessels failed. She really has. Weaponizing your office against political opponents over and over and again just to push a progressive liberal agenda does not make people happy. And people see it. They know what she's done.
So if you are elected, can we expect to see you prosecuting Republicans and Democrats?
Absolutely. Listen, I've sued Republicans in the past in federal court. I've sued the Michigan House of Representatives on the Republican side, claiming they violated people's civil rights. I'm not a partisan guy in any way. I'm a law and order guy who loves the Constitution and wants to enforce the rule of law.